It was a crime that would stun the nation.
It's now 9 days since 2 teenage girls disappeared from southern New South Wales.
In my 37 years in the police force, this was probably the cruelest and most tragic murder I've had to deal with.
The disappearance of 2 schoolgirls would devastate their friends and family.
I was 17 years old when I found out, and it rocked my world.
Are you able to tell me which of the 2 girls that was?
The one with the blonde hair.
The fate of Nicole Collins and Lauren Barry, and the appalling manner of their deaths, would confound the press and public alike.
Over the next 9.5 hours, Lauren and Nicole were repeatedly raped by both men at various points.
I said, you know, how did they die? She said, oh, throats cut. I said, who killed them? I killed both.
The case of the Bega schoolgirls was a crime that shook Australia. This untamed forest near the Cupra-Canberra National Park was the site of one of the most tragic, senseless crimes ever to occur in Australia. In October 1997, 2 young friends, 14-year-old Lauren Barry and 16-year-old Nicole Collins, were taken to the forest and brutally murdered. The events that led the 2 girls to that wild and remote location began on the 5th of October 1997. It was a beautiful afternoon on the Sapphire Coast in New South Wales, and a group of teenagers were camping just a few kilometres from home.
Tartha is a sleepy, tiny coastal village. The area that the girls were staying was down a dirt track. It's the type of place where you think that your kids could grow up, they could have the idyllic lifestyle.
On the day that Nicole and Lauren disappeared, we were camping in our camp spot that we would go to regularly with our horses. We'd been there for, I think, 2 days. We were just camping, doing the usual teenager thing. We had a fire, we were eating, listening to music.
These were teenagers. They were camping in a spot that was within minutes drive of one of the parents. They were camping in a big group, there were horses. They were doing all the sorts of things teenagers should be doing, and it should have been safe.
Also at the campsite that day was Lauren's older brother, Nathan.
My sister, she was in a really tight-knit group of friends. They were into the horses and horse riding, and tried to avoid me and my mates as much as possible, harassing them, as young boys do. She was my best friend, and she was very strong. She had to be, because I was always picking on her and blaming her for everything.
Nicole had actually recently broken up with her boyfriend, and she wanted to go and see him and see if they could, reconcile their relationship.
Sarah and I both had our boyfriends there, and they didn't, and they were feeling quite excluded, I think. They were talking about wanting to leave and go to our friend Michael's place, because that's where Nicole's ex-boyfriend was. So Nathan had come out to visit us that day. He'd driven out, he was older, he had his own car, he had a licence, and then he was leaving. And as he was getting into the car, I thought, quick, get up now, tell him that girls want to go with him. If you don't, you're going to regret it. But I was like, My logic brain ruled that out, like, that's stupid. What are you going to regret? Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? The urge was so strong in me to get up and tell him, wait, stop, the girls are going with you. A few hours later, it was dark and the girls decided that they really did want to go to the party and they were going to walk there. They had a torch, they had a bottle of Coke with some Jim Beam in it because we were classy. And they set off walking. I never thought that they would ever actually get there because it's a really long walk. So I thought they'll probably get to Nicole's house, which was the closest house, and go, too hard, and just sleep there.
So the last thing that I said to the girls before they left the campsite was, where are you going? Which Nicole said, I'm going to fix up my life, which obviously now, looking back, is ironic because she never got the chance.
The two young girls set off through the forest. It would be the last time that their friends would ever see them alive. Not long after they left, Lauren's brother Nathan arrived back at the campsite. When he got there, he discovered that Lauren and Nicole were gone.
Nathan missed the girls by only a matter of minutes when he came back that night. As he was driving in, he must have, they must have been so close.
I think it was around 10:10 at night. I was driving back to the campsite. Throughout my life, I've blamed myself a lot for not being there a little bit earlier, or not staying at the campsite and with, supporting them. It's pretty hard to take that. I was only 10 minutes out from perhaps picking them up myself.
And it wasn't until the next morning that we realised that there was something wrong.
On the night of the 5th of October 1997, two schoolgirls, Nicole Collins and Lauren Barry, left their friends at a local campsite and headed off through the bushland towards a party a few kilometres away. It would be the last time their loved ones would see them alive.
Nicole was very outgoing and very social and gregarious, and she would just go and make friends. She always wanted to be with people and doing things and going out and having fun.
I first met Nicole when I moved to Bega from Canberra. I was in year 7 and I'd just come from a school where I was actually bullied. So I was very vulnerable and didn't have any friends, didn't know anybody, and I was just sitting at school, by myself, and Nicole came up to me and said, I love your shirt. I was like, oh, okay, thank you. And from that moment on, just instantly like that, we were friends.
Lauren was much more shy. She was a lot like me. We were both introverts. We bonded, and I don't think I've ever had a friend like her that we just understood each other at some level. It was just a connection that we had, and everything that we did was funny. We were hilarious. We cracked each other up, and she was such a great girl.
The morning after the girls vanished, their friends and family began to realise something was terribly wrong.
My parents asked me where Lauren was, and I said, isn't she here? Hasn't she come home? They headed this way in the evening. It was just over a kilometre from the campground, so I assumed that she would be there. So at that point it was like, okay, she's not here. Something's not right, I guess. Maybe she's at Nicole's place. So I think my parents would have rung Nicole's parents to find out if the girls were there, and obviously they weren't.
I remember her parents arriving in the car and asking us, through the window, have you seen the girls? To which we replied no. They then said the girls are missing. So we immediately assumed, oh, they're just at somebody's house. We'll have to go and check everyone's house. To which we were told that had already happened, and they'd called up a few different places and a few friends, and they were nowhere.
We assumed that they might have gotten lost walking home, but when you assume something like that, knowing them so well, it was just a hope that that's all it was.
Before I knew it, basically, there was police, SES, VRA, everyone was up at our campsite within such a short amount of time.
We began searching all the coastline, all the bush, all the common places that the girls would hang out or go to. Popular places that they may have been, and no prevail. There was no sign of them.
It's now 9 days since 2 teenage girls disappeared from southern New South Wales. Lauren Barry and Nicole Collins have seemingly disappeared from a camping trip without a trace.
It's a pain that can't be described, I don't think. A total loss, emptiness. You can't get warm, you're just cold all the time because it's just a pain that is totally undescribable. Until you've been through it, you have no idea what it's like.
At this stage, we've got 2 avenues of inquiry. One is that the 2 girls have left the area voluntarily, and secondly, that they've been forcibly taken from the area.
Going through a lot of heartache. Just don't want it back. I don't care what I have to do to get it back.
After 3 weeks of desperate searching, the only sign of the 2 girls was a surf jacket with a checked pattern found by a dirt track at the local rubbish tip. The jacket belonged to Lauren Barry, but initial forensic examinations provided no clues, and with little else to go on, police made the extremely difficult decision to wind down the search.
I think I went back to Sydney after 2 wecs. I was told there's nothing that could be done and I need to try and get back to work and do things. I was 17. I just did what I was told and went back to my beautiful friends and family in Sydney that looked after me over that period. And I think the police at that point, after 2.5 weeks, started to wind down the search in the area and started to change into more of a detective sort of trying to look into evidence and find out where they may have ended up.
Mark Winterflood was one of the detectives left in the area, tasked with finding any clues that might help determine the whereabouts of the 2 girls.
There was a number of lines of inquiry, 8 or 9 of them, and we had them all listed on a whiteboard in the meeting room. And right at the end, when people were going home, a officer from Yass, a detective from Yass, had rung through and said these 2 men, Camilleri and Beckett, are quite capable of abduction or kidnapping.
Camilleri and Beckett were a 2-man crime wave. Camilleri was a standover man and Beckett was his lapdog. Beckett was known to sometimes sleep on the veranda out the front of Camilleri's house, waiting for him to tell him what to do. So Camilleri would send him outside and Beckett would go and sleep and wait for him there.
My first impression of Lindsay Beckett was that he was a quieter individual, easily led. He was a criminal who had 50 plus prior entries and very much out of control in the little town of Yass where they lived.
Beckett's mother had him when she was 15. He never knew his natural father. He was the child of a rape. He grew up in a really violent household. He was renowned for bar fights that he was involved in. Leslie Alfred Camilleri was a career criminal who was born in 1969 in Liverpool, Sydney. He had 146 convictions.
Both Camilleri and Beckett are heavy speed users. For people who are not familiar with speed, it's a drug which keeps you wide awake, and these guys could go 3 or 4 days without sleep, have 2 hours sleep and do it all again. That's the nature of the drug.
These 2 career criminals began to fall under the spotlight in connection with the disappearance of Lauren and Nicole. Having ruled out other suspects, police decided to pursue the lead, and it proved to be a wise move.
When the original team was sent home, there was this one line of inquiry left to look at Camilleri and Beckett. We then received further information from Yass that they had met with an informant, and all the information was that he'd had a conversation in a room with Camilleri and Beckett, that it was in the newspaper, and Camilleri had said words to the effect, "I bet the cops try to pin this on us." And we thought, that's a strange thing to say if you had no involvement whatsoever. So we raced up there and we decided we would interview Mr. Beckett. It was on that trip to Canberra that I was with another officer, Detective Stuart Gray, and in the early stage of the investigation, he had taken a statement from a fellow who had noticed on the hill at Evans Hill the next morning a large television set beside the road which was a light pink in colour. And then another person had also noticed it, who'd been surfing that morning, but later in the morning it had disappeared and no one could understand why. While we're on this trip to Canberra to speak to Mr. Beckett, Stuart Gray had said to me, you know, it would make sense if you're putting two girls in the car, you'd leave the TV out because it's just physically not space. And I really didn't think there was much in that at the time, but we sort of kept it up our sleeve.
Seated opposite us on the other side of the table is Mr. Lindsay Beckett. Lindsay, do you agree that apart from the three people I've described, there's no one else in the room?
That's correct.
And do you agree, just looking at the monitor there, it's 11:58 and a number of seconds?
Yes.
Okay.
We met Mr. Beckett and had quite a long conversation with him. He was the most relaxed person I've ever met. He actually had his feet up on the chair in the interview room as if he just didn't care. I held back the question about the television till quite near the end, and you could sense there was a change in his demeanour. He was obviously a bit uncomfortable when that came up and didn't have a good answer.
Can you recall the television being in the back seat at all at that time?
I don't know.
Can you recall getting rid of
those bags and stuff like that?
I don't know. Can you recall getting rid of the television at any time during that trip?
No.
Convinced the television may be the clue that could unlock the case, police discovered that Camilleri and Beckett had actually been given a TV as part payment for a drugs deal. They now needed to establish if that TV was the one found on the side of the road.
We went to the second-hand store and the guy he remembered it, he pulled out all his records and went through them. And he said, here it is, here's the brand, here's the serial number, and we got the lot. I said, wow. And so I said to him, can you remember what colour it was? He says, oh, I just think it was a wood grain TV. It wasn't anything special. It was quite an old one. So that really didn't fit. So we left there and we got out of Yass heading back to Bega, probably a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes. And for some reason, I'd given the dealer my business card with the mobile number. I got this mobile call from him apologising to say, listen, I forgot something which I think is really important. He said, that TV was pink. So, whoa, we stopped the car. Well, that's it. It's got to be it.
Detectives investigating the disappearance of Lauren Barry and Nicole Collins had discovered a vital clue in the hunt for the missing schoolgirls. A pink television found by the side of a road where the girls were last seen placed Leslie Camilleri and Lindsay Beckett in the area. An interview with Beckett confirmed the police's suspicions. 4 weeks after the girls went missing, police now needed to get Camilleri's version of events. And, as luck would have it, he was already in the hands of the law. In custody for a breach of bail, Camilleri was interviewed by detectives. They applied the same technique they had used with Beckett, keeping their information about the TV to themselves until the right moment.
During the interview, Camilleri started to spin a very vague story about where they'd been and what they'd done. And then at the penultimate moment, he asked him about, and did you have a pink TV in the car? Well, Camilleri just went absolutely silent, and it was like a minute silent. He just didn't know what to do and then said, I'm not talking to you any further. After the interview, Camilleri had gone back to his cell and was banging his head against the wall crying, saying they know about the television, and had to be sedated. And it's the first time I've ever had a prison psychologist contact police to say, I think this is significant evidence that you should know.
Detectives sensed that Beckett was the weaker of the pair and their best chance to crack the case. They were right.
We got Beckett out of custody at a police centre in Canberra, got him to an interview room, and before going to the room, I'd actually obtained 2 large photos of the 2 girls. And before I even said anything, I just pulled them out of my folder and placed them right in front of him. They were big A4 pictures. And he just saw the look in his eyes and he turned them over straight away. I thought, all right, we're on. So I quietly went through the story with him that I knew, that I could show where he was, that they were involved, and that Camilleri was no longer loyal to him, and that today he had an opportunity to show us what had happened. And I said, Camilleri's going to be made this offer later today. He may choose to take us there, he may not.
At one point, Beckett left the room for a cigarette. As they discussed the progress of the interview, the key question the detectives faced was whether they'd done enough to turn their suspect. Moments later, they had their answer.
I'd barely finished speaking and Beckett came at a fast pace down the corridor, straight into the room, and said, I'll show you where they are. We unfolded a large map we had with us, and you could see him following the Monara Highway. And he went sort of across the border, past Bombala, and said, I think they're about here. And I said, you know, how did they die? And she said, throats cut. I said, who killed them? I killed both.
Beckett proceeded to give a full statement, and before long, he was taking detectives on a sinister road trip, pointing out where knives had been dumped and bloodied clothing had been burnt. Hours later, the group arrived at Fiddler's Green Creek, an isolated area of forest just over the border into Victoria. They were almost 200 kilometres from where the girls were last seen.
So we're traipsing down through quite thick bush. And as we descend into this creek, you can smell putrefying flesh. We knew we were on the right track. And we pretty well came out near this massive tree with the roots hanging out, and you could see Lauren's skeleton straight away.
This is a electronically recorded interview between Detective Sergeant Mark Winterflood and Lindsay Beckett. Just across the creek and slightly upstream, we came to an area where there's a large tree fallen across the river.
Yep.
And beneath the root section of that tree in a portion of water was what appeared to be the remains of a deceased person.
Yes.
All right.
Then I asked him, where do we find the other girl?
Only a few metres away, police discovered the remains of Nicole Collins.
You led us to an area there which we searched, and we later found what appears to be the remains of another deceased body next to a small tree.
Yep.
Okay, and you indicated that to us?
Yep.
Okay. And are you able to tell me which of the 2 girls that was?
The one with the blonde hair.
And spectacles?
Yeah.
Right. At the time that she died, was she wearing spectacles?
No, she didn't have them on.
All right. Do you know what happened to them?
They should have been there.
They're somewhere near there?
Yeah.
I was 17 years old when I found out, and yeah, it rocked my world. It just destroyed every little bit of security or love and knowledge I knew of the world had just been shattered. I didn't know that this sort of stuff could happen, or that there were people in the world that could do this sort of harm to others.
With Beckett's statement, the police could finally piece together what had happened to the 2 girls and how their young lives had been tragically cut short.
So they disappeared from the campfire and they walked down a dirt track. Lauren had a black torch and Nicole was carrying some alcohol. They wandered towards the road, and sometime around the time the dirt road met the main road, a car drove past with Camilleri and Beckett in it.
They actually stop in the roadway. I think the girls might have been slightly on the roadway too, and are blocking access of other cars around them. And then as they get talking to the girls, they move the car off. And it was never really clear to me whether they were forced into the car or whether there was some duress involved. I suspect there was some duress involved, but for whatever reason, both girls get in the car.
If you were to ask anyone that knew these girls, they were very young girls. I still believe to this day, it doesn't matter what was said or what people may believe have happened, or you hear stories of people hitchhiking and getting into cars or being influenced to do things. They were very young. And if you ask anyone that knew them, they were very innocent. And for fear of their lives, I think is the only way they may have been coerced into the vehicle.
The mistake the two men make is that the car is full of stuff. So while they're talking to the girls and trying to induce them into the car, they take this television out and put it beside the road and move clothing and other stuff into the boot. So the girls then get into this car. What they don't realise is that both doors were inoperable. And so once they were in, they were locked in.
According to Beckett's version of events, after spending some time driving around looking for a beach party, the pair asked if the girls wanted to go with them to a festival in Bega. The girls supposedly agreed, on the condition that they could tell their friends where they were.
The girls wanted to go back to their campsite. They drive along the dirt road towards White Rock, which has these sort of speed humps to stop cars going in. Camilleri's car scrapes. He flies off the handle. They both produce knives, and from that point on, the girls are kidnapped. They come out of that road, go back onto the Snowy Mountains Highway, and then travel back onto into Callaroo itself, and then they turn left down a dirt road, which leads towards Bega Tip and south towards Merimbula. Now, it's my understanding that whilst on that road, they've stopped and removed both girls from the car, and they've both forcibly had sexual intercourse with each of the girls at knife point. What's interesting from that scene, and it's never completely clear to me, was that there were two items of clothing belonging to Lauren Barry that were left beside the road. Now, whether that was the actual scene of the sexual assault or whether that was Lauren throwing it out the window as a indicator that we've gone south, I really don't know. But nevertheless, when they were reported as missing, that was the first thing that was found, was a shirt and a jacket belonging to Lauren Barry.
Over the next 9.5 hours, Lauren and Nicole were repeatedly raped by both men at various points.
As dawn broke on the 6th of October, and following a night of the most appalling brutality, the car containing Lauren and Nicole arrived at Fiddler's Green Creek.
We tied the girls up, tied their hands up, and they went down to the river.
For the sake of the record, I'm showing Mr. Beckett two colour photographs of Nicole Collins and Lauren Barry.
It was her jeans.
Right.
Yeah.
Which you wrapped around their mouths?
Yeah.
Right. Did you tear them up or cut them up or something?
They just teared them off.
Right.
Both girls were then walked along a track and towards a creek bed.
Lauren Barry was tied on the ground there and fully tied, hands, feet and hog-tied behind her back. And then Beckett took Nicole Collins up a sort of a steep embankment that's about, I suppose, 10 metres away. And up the top, he tied her with her hands behind the back at a tree and her feet were tied. Camilleri leaves, instructing Beckett how to kill them. Drown this one and stab that one. Camilleri goes back to his car.
One was restrained on the ground, one was hands tied behind the back, to the tree?
To the tree, yeah.
Okay. And to your knowledge, Les got to the car before anything happened, is that right?
Yes.
Right. And he'd given you instructions of what he wanted done?
Yeah.
Okay.
Beckett then drags Lauren into the creek, which is quite shallow, but at this little corner where they were, there was a very large tree that had fallen in the water with its roots exposed, and there was quite a deep sort of hollow right there. So he's dragged her in there, and she's kicked and struggled and sprayed him with water.
He began to drown Lauren, who fought for her life, and stabbed her to ensure that she was dead until she stopped moving, while Nicole watched from the tree.
Then he's left there and gone up this embankment. He comes up behind Nicole, stabs her in the throat, and then she dies.
He then walked back to the car. Camilleri had returned to the car by that stage, and Camilleri asked him, "Did you see the demon? Did you feel the demon?" They got in the car. Beckett slept until they reached Canberra, where Camilleri instructed him on how to burn the ropes and the bloodied clothing, and then they went and threw the knives into Lake Burley Griffin and then went home.
With Beckett admitting his role in the murders of Lauren and Nicole, police now had to find out what part Camilleri had played in ending the girls' lives.
After the interview with Beckett, Detective Sergeant Muir, instead of coming to the scene, had gone to Goulburn Jail to take on the interview with Camilleri. During that interview, Camilleri put forward a version of events that he had been in the car. Yes, some girls had got in, he'd fallen asleep, had no real recollection. Beckett came back to the car with blood on, etc., etc., distancing himself from anything to do with the murders.
Despite the denials, Beckett's statement was enough for police, and both men were charged with murder. But now, detectives faced another challenge: how to prove Camilleri was responsible when he wasn't even present for the killings. In August 1998, two men stood charged with the brutal murder of two young girls, Lauren Barry and Nicole Collins, who'd been abducted whilst on a camping trip with friends the previous October. The accused, Leslie Camilleri and Lindsay Beckett, had been arrested after a police operation, and Beckett was quick to confess. Camilleri, on the other hand, refused to accept any part in the crimes.
When Beckett and Camilleri came before the courts in Victoria, Beckett entered a plea of guilty, and he was dealt with before the trial of Camilleri. And I remember at the sentencing, the judge reading Nicole's death, which was horrific. And then he sort of looked at Beckett and his barrister and said, "Your client did that?" and just sort of shook his head.
Justice Vincent didn't think he'd ever heard a more terrible or moving description of a death of a person. He said Beckett was nothing more than a quite willing participant, and there was never any suggestion the girls were going to be released.
Beckett was given a 35-year minimum term, and that was also on the proviso, his agreement to give evidence against Camilleri.
Lindsay Beckett's testimony was crucial towards securing a conviction against Leslie Camilleri. It was clear that both men had taken drugs during the trip. In his defence, Camilleri's lawyer said that Camilleri had been taking heroin, that he'd either been half asleep or asleep during most of the trip, and that he had not been involved in the murders at all.
The difficulty with Camilleri's case was that he physically was not present at the murder. So the onus was on the prosecution to demonstrate the level of control that he had over Beckett, and that Beckett was acting at his behest in killing the girls. And from a legal position, that's quite a tough call.
Luckily, the prosecution could call on science to help them in the case against Camilleri. Detectives had collected the clothing belonging to Lauren Barry, found at the side of the dirt track, and sent it for analysis.
They found a tiny trace of Camilleri semen on Lauren's jacket, which absolutely sealed his involvement in the sexual assaults and gave corroboration to Beckett's version of events.
Another chilling piece of evidence that further strengthened the case against Camilleri was found in police files.
2 weeks prior to the murder of the girls, there'd been an incident in Canberra where Camilleri and Beckett had picked up a girl who was also a speed user, and they'd all used speed together. They then went on to have her in the back seat of the same car with the doors that you couldn't open. She was then sexually assaulted at knife point and taken along various dirt roads out of Canberra. And at one point, she was quite desperate and said, "I need to go to the toilet," which was a bit of a ploy. And when they opened the door for her, she ran, and she ran and ran and ran to a wombat burrow where she hid herself. And they were searching through the bush with their knives trying to find her. She then goes to a farmhouse, makes the complaint. Police arrive, arrange for her to be forensically examined and to make a statement.
The victim of that ordeal ultimately chose not to give the police a statement, and she disappeared. Her case was shelved. That was until the Bega detectives managed to track her down and convinced her to speak to them.
Within a week, they had actually found her and committed her to a statement which read like a live enactment of what must have happened to the 2 girls.
She established their way of operating. So they had picked her up from the street. They, on her account, had sexually assaulted her. So it seemed to show that they at least had a way of operating that seemed quite similar to the way they operated in the case of the Bega schoolgirls.
Her evidence of surviving the sexual assaults and running away at knife point, in New South Wales we call it tendency evidence. In other words, the person has a propensity to do that sort of violence. So demonstrating that in Camilleri's case was compelling.
For the friends and relatives of Lauren and Nicole, the trial represented another terrible ordeal that they had to face.
I remember my father holding me back, and also a security guard behind us holding me back, and just listening to the story and someone reading out what he had done to my sister and Nicole. Every word was like a dagger in your body, and I was sort of feeling everything she went through, both the girls went through, and trying to fathom and understand what it must have been like. It just tears open the wounds even more. They hadn't even had a chance to heal.
As I stood in the witness stand, I do remember Leslie Camilleri was staring at me, and it was a horrible, horrible feeling knowing that this monster who killed my friends was metres away from me and staring at me. I do remember he would be, purposely putting his hands up and yawning so everyone in the court could see him. He had no remorse for what he'd done and for anyone else in the room.
In April 1999, after a trial lasting almost 2 months and involving over 70 witnesses, Leslie Camilleri was found guilty of the murders of Lauren Barry and Nicole Collins.
When Camilleri was found guilty, in his judgment, Judge Vincent said, "You will represent the dark in which women and children fearfully walk. Through your own acts, you have forfeited your right to ever walk among us again." It was at that point we realised he was going to be given the life sentence.
For the murders of Lauren and Nicole, Leslie Camilleri was sentenced to life in prison and with no possibility of parole. He will die behind bars. In 2013, he was sentenced to another 28 years after admitting to the murder of teenager Prue Bird. That was in 1992, 5 years before Lauren and Nicole went missing. For his part in the Bega schoolgirl murders, Lindsay Beckett was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years.
Considering what they had done to other human beings, there has to be more to I knew what capital punishment was, and I thought, well, why can't we kill these people? Get rid of them, eradicate them. We do that with animals. We're animals. If someone has done this, why can't we get rid of them? But then at the same time, there's so much love and compassion inside me. I didn't want that either. I didn't want to be like them, and I didn't know whether they deserved more or less, or what was going to happen to them in jail.
What compounds the anguish for the victims' families is the truly unbelievable timing of the crime. That the girls emerged onto the highway precisely as two of the most dangerous men imaginable were driving past. Perhaps if they'd been just 30 seconds later, they might just have continued walking. They might have gone on to live out their lives.
In my 37 years in the police force, this was probably the cruelest and most tragic murder I've had to deal with. Most of the detectives involved would have been on previous murder investigations, but what I think separated this one was that the intense cruelty of their final hours of the two girls, that they should suffer such horrific sexual experiences and then be killed so brutally. Most of us on the team had daughters, and so you empathise with parents as to how, I don't know how they could ever move on from it. I don't think you could possibly.
What I'd say to them, if I ever saw them again, is that I'm really sorry. And that's the hardest thing for me, is the guilt. Living with the guilt that we couldn't save them. That they were in that car for so long, waiting for someone to save them. I didn't save them. Living with the guilt of that, feeling that I let them down. And it was a betrayal of sorts, that they were my friends and I couldn't help them when they needed help the most.
I find it really hard to focus on anything, even day-to-day tasks, getting out of bed and caring for my lovely family, my two young boys, because I feel very broken inside.
They will live in my heart forever. I will absolutely never forget them. Not a day goes by where I still don't think about them.
In March 2017, Nathan Barry offered to take Sarah to Fiddler's Green Creek. It was the first time she had visited the place where her friends had died.
So if you want to follow me down here, and I'll take you down to the site. Although it's what we all know, the beautiful Australian bush with all the smells and sounds and the peace and harmony of it all, it would be pretty quickly taken away if you were a young girl being forced against your will to trudge through this steep and rugged terrain, not knowing where you're going and knowing that you're being taken further and further away from the ones you love and who you knew were probably searching for you.
It's just blown me away at how dense it is, how hard it is to get here. It's not what I had in my mind. It's really given me just sort of the last puzzle piece, you know. I've seen it and I've been here now, so.
The legacy of this case will be, we need to stop victim blaming, because it's never, ever, ever the victim's fault. And that happened a lot when the girls went missing. Oh, they shouldn't have been walking along the road, they shouldn't have been hitchhiking, they shouldn't have been drinking, they shouldn't have done this, they shouldn't have done that. Well, actually get stuffed, because it's taking blame off the perpetrators and putting it on the victims. And it's making women feel like you have to be afraid all the time and you have to be careful all the time and you always have to think about what you're doing and where you're going and who's going to be with you. But we're not putting that onto the perpetrators of the crime. Like, you have to not commit crimes. You have to, when you feel the urge to rape someone, you have to stop that. And, you know, so I hope that the legacy of this will be, it's always the perpetrator's fault and never, ever the victim's fault.
I guess my message or anything I could say to everyone that's perhaps listening to this in the world, and however they're receiving it, from whatever background or race or belief or philosophy they have, is that I think we need to create more community within society, stop being so judgmental and selfish, and have gratitude for what we have. And the biggest thing is we have each other. We're all human beings and we need to turn around and hug each other a lot more regularly. That's the biggest thing. We're not hugging. We need to hug. I'm all about that. And I think there is hope for humanity, but it's a really hard thing to say when coming from what I've been through and what I continue to suffer every day.